So what is this? Vaush v. Bastiat, round 3 or something. We're taking another trip to Coconut Island, where they're going to be debating capitalism. This is a libertarian. Remember, this is a libertarian event for libertarian students who love, powered by students who love liberty. So this is going to be a hostile audience to Vaush. It's going to be and Bastiat being a big oil lawyer, is probably going to get a lot of love here. So let's see how it goes. Damn, it really is Nashville, huh?
On the internet too. Thank you, Dylan. I like your mask. It's a good one. And now, last but not least,
no one's gonna wear a mask.
Two of the most brilliant, powerful, and provocative people on the internet. One of them is a libertarian socialist and a political pundit, among many other things. The other one is a chief neoliberal shill, 2021, and a streamer. We have Vaush versus Bastiats.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm not sure if this is copywritten, so I'm gonna mute it, and we're going to skip ahead. Here we go.
Happy to host this one as well, and so I'll just give you guys a few of the rules. The rules are going to be, if I'm talking, it's purely to moderate. I'm not giving my opinion. They're going to have a short intro and outro section. I've moderated for both of them on many occasions, so they're all familiar with my rules and my mannerisms. So I'm sure they'll be able to hold themselves accountable, and I won't have to step in and be the big authoritarian government coming in to stop your freedom.
Good. He's been listening already.
Wonderful. Okay. So they're going to be debating whether the socialist model, Vaush's proposed socialist model, or Bastiat's neoliberal shill model is the better one for preserving and perpetuating liberty. Is that correct? We all under that understanding? Wonderful.
Like that.
Okay. So I'm going to give Vaush the first intro. I'm going to try to count it down for 2 minutes, so try to keep it short. Then Bastiat, and then we'll have an open session where they can go back and forth. So Vaush, you want to take it away?
Okay. Is this thing on? Nice. First of all, hello, Nashville. So nice to be here. That doesn't count against my time. The applause doesn't count. So in my Twitter bio, which is home of all political innovation, I call myself a libertarian socialist, which is a term I think many people find contradictory. Libertarianism typically being defined as an opposition to big government, and socialism, well, not so much. But historically and semantically, I think there's a lot of overlap there. And I think that we have a lot more to agree on, non-socialist libertarians and socialist libertarians, especially when we learn or at least seek to understand different types of freedom. There are negative and positive liberties. And when we talk about libertarianism here in the West, I think we often talk about the negative, freedom from restriction, to mitigate the number of regulations, rules, laws, preventing us from doing that which we want to do. I see this often in libertarian conventions. I remember that fellow who got booed for suggesting, licenses to drive. That was, you remember, yeah. But positive liberty, which is an equally important concept, possibly even more, is the ability to act on your will. And here in the United States, we don't have a lot of positive liberty when we're poor, do we? The freedom to travel, to get good education, to get good health care, to make sure that illnesses aren't debilitating, that we don't lose limbs to diabetes, to make sure that we can spend the time that we want in our leisure time and at work. All of that is gate-kept behind economic institutions, which I think in many cases deprive us of freedoms, not by explicitly preventing us from doing these things, but by denying us the chance at doing it. That's why I'm a socialist. And I think that when you think about liberty in that way, it
30 seconds.
I think when you think of liberty in that way, it leads itself naturally to an understanding of socialism, not as an advocacy for big government, but an advocacy for any system when used properly, which enhances the extent to which the average citizen can act upon their will without hurting others, of course. And I guess that's why I don't think the term libertarian socialism is a contradiction.
Okay. I mean, it seems like pretty far par for the course for how Vaush typically describes libertarian socialism and libertarianism in a big I remember, how did Vaush like to describe it? He described like socialism as being he described it as socialism being making good on the promises of liberalism, if I remember correctly. So it seems that's the route that he's going to go for here. Let's see what Bastiat has to say.
Wonderful. So for the next 2 minutes, it will be. I'll hand it over to Bastiat.
Psyched out.
Hey,
Thanks
folks,
so
my
much
name
for
is
the sub.
Bastiat. I stream on Twitch, and I was very graciously introduced as a neoliberal shill. I affiliate with some of the good folks at the Neoliberal Project. You might want to check them out on Twitter sometime. They do a lot of great work. And I appreciate that Vaush kind of took some time to introduce kind of where he intersects with libertarians, because I feel somewhat similar in my relationship with libertarianism. I appreciate and accept a lot of the basic libertarian morality, but I think that a lot of the policy prescriptions that I propose, which I think are essential to a functioning and free and durable free society, are essential and yet are oftentimes scorned by libertarians of different stripes. For example, I believe, as I think Milton Friedman argued very persuasively, that the government must not only ensure competitive markets, but must ensure the institutions necessary to maintain those competitive markets, some antitrust regulations, for example, and aid to people to alleviate acute misery and distress, to ensure that people feel like they've got hope in a free society and do not turn to alternatives, which I believe are almost always going to be authoritarian in nature, whether they are intended to be so or not. And so, in that sense, I appreciate that making that discussion, making that distinction. One of the things that concerns me, though, about a lot of the variants of socialism that are proposed is that while I appreciate the respect that they have for the lessons of history and the experience of socialist experiments in the past, I worry that they ultimately could lead to new forms of central planning and state coercion that are of a nature that, while not intended, are nevertheless very likely to be harmful and to rob us, indeed, not just of the negative liberties, but even some of the positive liberties that we currently enjoy in many free societies, even if, for example, in the United States, there are a lot of ways we'd like to improve upon the existing system. So I look forward to talking with Vaush here today.
Sure. Okay. So cruel worldview. Yeah. Cruel world idea. If we let socialism happen, the government's going to come in and take everything from us. So how sad. Also, what's up, Rez?
Wonderful. So now, now we're gonna have an open dialogue. You guys can go back and forth. Just one principle I hope you both can live by is that when you both talk at the same time, you actually don't get double the information. You get none of it.
Yeah.
So do your best to be cordial, or I'll have to step in. You two can start interjecting with one another.
Well, so I guess one of the things that concerns me about a lot of libertarian socialism is that it seems like you would nevertheless need a lot of the institutions that we might ordinarily refer to as central planning in order to make the system work. For example, it seems to me that if you had a society of broad-based democratic workplaces, presumably that's kind of what we would imagine to be the basic unit of production in a libertarian socialist kind of society, right? If we have a system like that, I think we run into a big problem with the issue of capital investment, because it seems like we're no longer going to have trillions in private investment come down from Wall Street. We're going to need some way to ensure that these democratic workplaces can get investment and can do so in a way that comports with more socialist principles and the sort of capitalist private ownership that we have today. And it seems like what you would get, however you did it, would have to be done through government in some kind of fashion that could not help but amount to central planning by another name. It wouldn't be the same kind of central planning that we've seen in socialist societies in the past, where you decide how many pairs of shoes are built for, what are assembled for what kind of plan, but it would nevertheless determine for political purposes, rather than for the purposes of investing efficiency, what kind of entities are favored by the state and which are disfavored by the state. And that seems to me like something that could endanger a lot of our freedom. It would be very difficult, for example, to criticize your local government if your local government determines whether you're going to get any investment, whether you're going to be able to make your payroll, things like that. So I guess that's kind of my first concern, is I feel like some of the positive liberties that we enjoy in advanced democracies, we don't have it yet in the United States, but universal healthcare, for example, depends on a thriving economy to pay for it. But if we've got central planning that reduces efficiency and makes us less free through the course of some of the potential loss of political freedom I highlighted here, I worry that we've sort of got some bad results out of good intentions.
So,
okay. Oh, geez. All right, so we highlighted a couple of things there. Not being able to criticize your government because the government decides on whether you become a business or not. Don't you already do this already? Don't businesses like Google or Amazon have to deal with this already? When it comes to how the government regulates them, don't they already have the incentive to just be super kind and nice to the government because the government could break them up? I mean, lots of people in the government have been trying to break up Google and Amazon, Apple even, for a really long time, and those pushes are still going on. Don't they have that incentive here already? to be, I guess, nice to the government or something. I'm not necessarily sure what that means. Like, you can't criticize your government when the government has the ability to do what it wants with your business. Can't the government literally just, couldn't the president just like appropriate the fucking business? Like, we've at least with like the War Powers Act, right? They could just you could, I mean, that's something that people are really wanting Donald Trump to do when the pandemic first hit, right? Like take some control of some companies and have them start producing things like ventilators. It's definitely not as easy as just like one person being able to like write with a mark of a pen, they could like just like gobble up companies. I know it's harder than that, but there's already a mechanism there for that sort of stuff to happen.
I'd like to tackle that if I may. First of all, to clarify, I identify as a market socialist. So
my bad. And capital investment as well. So here's a really big thing, is that capital investment is pretty important to an economy. Typically economies that don't have any capital investment at all seem to not thrive as well. And capital investment can kind of come in the form of things like a stock market, right? So I have a stock portfolio, and so I have some stocks as well. But typically a lot of the things is that companies legally have to be making money for their stockholders. That's like what a lot of corporations, that's their legal purpose in being, is making money for their stockholders and not their stakeholders, which would be like the workers and the people who depend on the company for their like utilities or anything along those lines, or their services for their like day-to-day. They're beholden to their shareholders, not their stakeholders there. So that would be, one thing that we would want the government to do is help, government and society to help shift that paradigm. So at the very least, if there was still something like a stock market where you could like invest and people could like buy parts of it, is that the workers would still have like a really big say in how those things happen.
I don't think that the experiments of the Soviet Union and, say, for example, Mao's China were a particularly phenomenal demonstration of socialist principles. I think that worker cooperatives, when businesses are owned collectively by the people who work there, are a good and ethical system for organizing labor. You bring up an interesting point, though, because capital investment is going to be a necessary component of any kind of market system. You do need higher institutions choosing where money goes. And I think to an extent you're assigning an undue level of potential malevolence to the government in these cases. If you had a system where worker cooperatives look towards the government for investment, it could be as decentralized or as removed from political influence as many of the systems that work in the government today. For example, the PPP system we got during the beginning of COVID, the government wasn't like selectively denying like some businesses they didn't like. It's just a broad bureaucratic structure that we can universally rely on, even if the folks in Washington don't like us. And it strikes me a bit hypocritical as well, because today banks don't loan money to cooperative ventures, at least not as often as traditional firms. Cooperatives, what I care about, are generally shafted by traditional banking loans because they're considered scary out there, in spite of the fact that cooperatives actually have a higher return on initial investment because they tend to be more stable. They resist price shocks. So we live today in a system where political biases influence which types of economic organizations get up off the ground. And even if you leave that aside, I mean, even if you were able to universally delegate loans to everyone in a private system, the problem remains that the private system is not exactly impartial with which businesses rise and fall. Private ownership and the benefits it accrues also lead to things like monopolization, which just directly strangles out competition, either in a local market or sometimes globally, depending on how much influence they have. These are problems directly linked to systems of private ownership because the incentive structures in those systems don't really exist, at least not in the same way in cooperatives. At the end of the day, when we're talking about capital investment, you're always deferring to a higher power. The question is, will that higher power be democratic, or will it be an elite autocracy of banks and venture capital firms that have no obligation to the public good whatsoever, not even nominally? And I would choose the former.
I want to see Vaush do a little. I want to see if he's going to do this, if he's going to chip away at sort of the like libertarian sort of like capitalist ideal that like a lot of capitalist firms are like hyper super rational when it comes to the decisions that they make. We've seen so many companies throughout like the history of time be so incredibly irrational. I mean, something like stock buybacks, right? Is something that can be pretty irrational in a lot of cases, where they actually forego innovation, they forego expanding the business when there's opportunity to, in place of just pumping up their own stocks because it does better for their for their board members and their CEO and their shareholders as well, instead of anything else. Because at the end of the day, once again, they care about their shareholders more than anything else. So sometimes those short-term gains are more important than long-term viability as well.
So there are two things I'd like to ask about that. One, the smaller issue, I would say smaller, at least for our discussion, of the issue of cooperatives investment. And then the bigger issue of the democratic nature of the system and the malevolence or lack thereof of government. So I just mentioned that because I don't want to lose both of those. But I think they're both interesting points you bring up. So with respect to cooperatives, you made an interesting argument when you said they have a higher rate of return, and yet banks and investors typically don't invest in them. And from all the research I've seen, I have no, and I really wouldn't purport to make an argument against cooperatives as they exist today in the United States or in other advanced developed countries. Economically, they seem to be about the same, not much better, not much worse than any other form of institution, with the exception of their maintenance of employees, in the sense that they're less likely to fire or lay off employees, and they're more likely to, say, take a haircut off of everybody's pay. That seems to be kind of what I've seen in terms of the biggest difference. I wasn't aware that they had higher rates of return, but let's assume that they, I'll range to that point. Why then, in a capitalist system that often regularly funds people and interests that are politically opposed to it, I imagine folks have seen the thrilling discourse about some, the socialists, houses and income and all that, right? I mean, they were able to participate in the system with a lot of investment. What would be the reason then that these banks would deny investment to entities that offer a lucrative rate of return?
Well, actually, one place where we could look would be the movie industry. You know how a lot of people complain about how there's so many how a lot of people complain about why there's so many remakes and redos is because they're really safe, right? They seem really safe to a lot of big businesses, a lot of production agencies that, oh, this is something that's already been proven, let's just go at it again, saying that it's it's just safe. We can get there's a group of people that we could just exploit a little bit for their nostalgia for the series, so let's just make another one off of it. So we could just make another one off of it, but actually a lot of new properties, instead of reused ones, do a lot better sometimes than the redos. But instead of a lot of companies going for those newer properties, they still see them as pretty unreasonable, but they just keep going. But they still see them as not something they want to invest in, even though they seem to be doing pretty well.
At the end of the day, I think it comes down to limited information. I don't think that the bankers are malicious, ideologically driven. I don't think they're going about it like that. But back during the the Jim Crow era, even though it was perfectly legal to serve people of any race, oftentimes businesses would not. And that's an economically inefficient decision. You can make the argument you're playing to social biases, but at the end of the day, you're objectively limiting a market. You see that too with Legos marketing more to boys in the 90s, computer stuff as well. I mean, you're limiting the share of the market. I think that at the end of the day, these systems, as much as we like to believe that they're above our petty concerns, are ultimately the product of a lot of systemic biases that get ingrained and codified. And cooperatives are just not very well understood in this country, which is a shame. They're growing. There are more cooperatives today in America than there have been in a long time, and an interest in them is rising, which makes sense because we live in an era of unprecedented worker discontent, at least since the Great Depression. And worker cooperatives have a very, 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 very great difference in how people who work there feel, their general level of happiness. It makes sense that it would be rising up in these times.
Yeah, I would say that I would agree with the argument. That seems to be from my research, what I found too, is that there's a lack of awareness among a lot of the people who, I guess, kind of grease the wheels of capitalism, attorneys like myself and accountants, and who just don't generally work with these forms of organization. So I would say that also to me seems to be one reason that they're not more popular. I've also seen occasionally in regulation where they are occasionally disadvantaged in some way. The USDA does aid to rural enterprises, and they will provide loan opportunities with very low collateralization. And other entities in government, like the Small Business Association, their collateralization requirements are higher, and so the low collateral is good for a cooperative because they can't really do a corporate guarantee that requires somebody to basically sign off. There's not some big rich angel investor, and that makes the guarantee a little harder. So there are.
Yeah, so they get disenfranchised a lot, and like I said, a lot of companies look at a co-op and go, "What the fuck is that shit?" Why are you running it like that? What's happening here? I don't want to throw my money at that. I don't know what's going to happen, right? And a lot of people just think that workers are kind of fucking stupid, you know? They just think that they're just dumb. So they would care more about like having nice like cool looking floor tiles than expanding their business or something. So a lot of people just kind of think that they're incapable of running a functional business as well. So, which is pretty sad.
There are some issues, but they seem to be issues that we're working on. The Paycheck Protection Program was pretty open to cooperatives, for example. So that it seems like we are kind of ironing those issues out. But I agree, there's a lot of information asymmetry there. And then the bigger issue of malevolence is something I want to talk about, because I don't believe necessarily that government is inherently malevolent. What I was thinking about in terms of government is that right now, under our system, there is an incredible amount of lobbying and influence in government to, get all the kinds of special or favorable, even really treatment. I don't mean to make it sound malicious. It's favorable treatment in our tax code or in the law for one particular business enterprise or another. And then I imagine, that on top of taxes, which are a relatively small part of overall business, you have to lobby the government, as anybody would, assuming they have the right to, for access to capital investment or greater access to it or special access, to say, well, perhaps I'm not as profitable an entity, but I provide a useful social function. One thing in particular that concerns me is the example of Yugoslavia, where they had capital investment that was devoted specifically to firms that had large numbers of employees, whether they were efficient or not. It became a kind of backhanded subsidy for laborers. The entire economy is dragged down by this. And I don't see a reason why here in the United States, where our own policies often favor entities with lots of employees over entities that are efficient or innovative, would really be any different. I just imagine that, like every other country in the world, lobbyists would kind of make the process less economically efficient than the competitive rules of a capitalist order do, however imperfectly they do.
It's one of those things where the fish probably couldn't define water if you asked them what it was, We have a horrendously inefficient system for determining which businesses are efficient right now. Businesses close constantly. Most don't survive the first couple of years.
Oh, especially small businesses. Isn't the vast majority of small businesses, they do not survive their first couple of years? And they get smothered out all of the time. Competition is completely dwindling. What is it, like six companies own like most of the media that you watch? Only a handful of companies own most of the products that you buy. To say that like I don't know, like the system that we have right now is not doing that great, and that's why we have a lot of business there to step in the way and stop a lot of businesses from doing what they think would be best, but does not provide like a great social order, right? Because even if a company really super duper wanted to be racist, we have laws to say that they can't be racist. And maybe in like some really bumfuck shitty towns, them being racist would get them more business, but we kind of say the utility for that's a social cost that we don't think is worth it for making more money. Lots of businesses do something like this. If I have any Canadians here, any goddamn Canada people, I know Canada for a fact has some rules when it comes to media, is that a lot of stations have to play a certain amount of Canadian owned media, because or else they would a lot of their businesses, especially media businesses, would be completely fucking smothered by the like cultural behemoth that is America, which I think that's fine. And even though that may be not as profitable to a lot of Canadian businesses, it still keeps around a decent amount of like Canadian made things in their borders, which I don't think like is a really bad thing for trying to protect a little bit against when you're sitting right next to fucking the United States. Right, just trying to keep something in your in your country. I mean, and it goes and a lot of good things come from that, right? That can still be beneficial to the market. I mean, Canada has, if I remember correctly, they have a system for where you can apply to a loan to get to get some funding for the government if you're trying to make like a work of art, and that's how we got Cuphead. Right. There are some other games as well, and some other movies as well that we really enjoy that came from that system. So, and Cuphead is not just a success because the government said it would be. Cuphead is a success because the devs made a great game. I love Cuphead. Oh, I think he may actually mention that, but we'll see.
And especially, I mean, in the restaurant industry, for example, which is eternally going to be in high demand, it's the sink or swim model doesn't take into account the externalities, because every sink is loans to the bank met unfulfilled, is a family's finances left in devastation, is all the external problems following from that. And this happens every year to hundreds of thousands of people. Not just here, but all around the world. When we look at other systems, we often see their downsides, of which there are no doubt many with any. But we're so sometimes, I think, unwilling to consider what they're being compared to. When we're talking about accruing investment from the government, regardless of how that's done. For example, over in Canada, I know they have a very robust arts investment program. The game Cuphead, if anyone's played that, it's good, was largely funded through investment from the Canadian government. They see worthy artistic projects and they put money into it. It seems to produce good results, probably not universally applicable to all businesses, but I think it speaks to an alternative model, maybe, something that we could dip our toes into. Even if the government were just to loan out to the best applicants within like counties per. I think that might actually lead to a better system than we have right now, because I find it difficult to imagine any system which would produce as much abject misery as the one we have now, where all the failed business ventures get shuffled under by the new real estate and they never get thought of or considered again. Especially, you know, since with regards to all those failed ventures, I mean, we're not just talking about like the failure of the business of the family's finances. We're talking about lost time in real estate, like constant turnover in areas with a lot of economic upturn. Stuff like this can be economically devastating, especially to small towns. And these externalities get shuffled off, like how big box stores and Walmart, you know, everything costs less there. Then why is it that when they move into mid-sized towns, everyone there gets poorer? It's a very strange economic problem, and I think it requires out-of-the-box solutions to even begin to address.
Yeah. Those massive box stores just plopping down in the middle of towns, and then just a massive, just like a ball of pavement just sprawls out from it, just erasing everything near it, destroying a lot of the diversity in the market, destroying all of those people's finances, destroying people's lives. Family businesses go completely under, and everything's cheaper there, and then people just get poor. It is curious, right? One big thing. So I don't live too far away from like some pretty rural people, some pretty like backwoods. I don't know what the fuck's happening. This road used to be a dirt road for horses, maybe 5 years ago type roads. And those people who live down there, that we have, it takes them 30 minutes maybe to get to a store, and the store that they'd be going to would be Walmart. Okay. And it is wild, because I learned, and I'm not going to say the name exactly, but I learned that they have a special name for a Dollar General around, like that's right on the cutoff to where it just goes into like farmland and back roads. Like the city stops. You could just see the city, just a big line that just stops, and then it's just farmland and backwoods all the way, you know, all the way sprawling out for forever into the middle of Kentucky. And they call that their superstore, a Dollar General. It's like, or it's off. It's terrible. Where you get those like fucking frozen, disgusting Salisbury steaks. You know what I mean? You know, where your family's living off Hot Pockets and Stouffer's. That's not good for anyone. It's not great. So it's important to remember that markets don't do what's good. Markets don't do what's right. Markets don't do what needs to be done. Markets are like, especially like capital, and where capital flows, it flows to where it can be afforded, right? That's why a lot of capital can't be, that's why a lot of like businesses, I don't believe, can take care of a lot of our like real issues, is because money doesn't, like products and money and innovation doesn't flow to where it's needed. It flows to where it can be afforded. And so that's why there's so many people who are always left out, because even though they need something, they can't afford it. And it's great to have the government do things like this. It doesn't only work for like, it doesn't only work for like some arts projects. I mean, a lot of the things that we have today started off from government funding, because we can able to shuffle off a lot of the risk to everyone. And so if you're already paying taxes, we might as well use those taxes to try and make something great. And so you can use the government for things, for like good adventures. You can use the government for adventures into things that other companies would be fearful of because they'd be losing a lot of money, like paying for drugs. Like a lot of R&D that goes into medicines is very expensive. And if nothing comes out of that, they just lost maybe $1 billion, right? If you have the government do something like that, they won't have to worry about losing all of that money and their business going under because they don't have a business. They're just doing it for the public good. A lot of our space travel right now that even SpaceX is using happened because of government investment, like from NASA and that research that we got there, not because it would be profitable, but because it would be good.
I think there's some interesting points there. One, I feel like actually the example of Canada and the way that it has decided to fund media and art is an example of kind of the problem that I highlighted. Canada makes special privilege for Canadian content. They feel, being a nation of 30 million on the border with a nation of 330 million, that they have to give Canadian-based content, Canadian movies and film, a lot of special attention. And so they have, under the Trudeau administration, proposed a system of increased taxation of entities like Netflix and Hulu and things like that, making costs much greater for the average person for the purpose of then using that money to fund Canadian content that most Canadians don't watch, don't particularly want, or have any special interest in. Nevertheless, the Canadian content is very popular with special interests who are able to use their leverage in the government to ultimately get themselves special favors that are popular in the abstract, even though they cost a lot in the ordinary sense to ordinary Canadians. But it's also kind of a death by a thousand cut thing, right? Because if you pay $5 more or something for an online subscription, maybe that doesn't feel too bad. But in the aggregate, that's a lot of waste in exchange for a benefit that you just won't enjoy. And then you imagine that kind of stuff happening across every sector instead of the special sectors that are able to capture state favors in our liberal democratic system.
Well, I don't know how this is much different than the system that we have. Well, even if that was the case, where the vast majority of things people don't care about, well, I think it's good. I think it's a good thing for them to be able to try. Even like not everything that's going to come out of a system like that is going to be like a Cuphead or an absolute banger. That's not going to happen. There's still like going to be lots of stuff that doesn't go anywhere. And sure, there are going to be people who abuse it like that. Sure, that happens. But you know what? I would rather them be able to have the opportunity to try and not like have a risk of going homeless than the system that we have here, where lots of people have great ideas but aren't able to try. I mean, the smartest person who ever existed probably wasn't like Einstein or Newton or someone that we know of. The smartest person that ever existed was probably someone who had to like till fields and feed their family and was maybe killed in like some surf like genocide or something, you know? That's probably the smartest person that could have provided like so much to society, but they were too busy having to deal with things that or maybe it could be someone who's like on the streets homeless somewhere in the US right now. Who knows, right? But they don't have that opportunity to try.
So that's one point I raised. That's kind of an example to me of some of the things I fear happening across all industries. But another point that Vaush mentioned, I think is a very important point that you mentioned, I think it's a very good point, is the fact that a lot of businesses will fail. I think you said it was like how many, on average?
I think that it's like nearly 2/3, right, for the first 3 years.
Yeah,
I think.
I've heard numbers like that too. And I think it's important to note that there are a couple of things to consider. And this is where I would especially hope that a lot of libertarians are open to what it is I'm about to say. So for me, as a good neoliberal shill, I really like trade. I think free trade has been a blessing and a boon for the United States and indeed for, I'd say, the whole world, but especially the United States, as being the original globalist country that is most responsible, I think, for defining the terms of the international economic order as we enjoy it today. Well, unfortunately, trade, though I think it benefits more people and society in the aggregate, does come with costs. The North American Free Trade Agreement, our opening of trade relations with China, have led to massive benefits for most, but they've been small and broadly dispersed across society for everybody, right? A massive benefit for society, but broadly dispersed. The pain that has resulted, on the other hand, from these free trade agreements in the sense of closed factories, lost jobs, has been much smaller in the aggregate, but that pain is much more noticeable, much more severe on the individual level, and it's much more visible. And it's much easier to craft a political narrative on. Because if I tell you, yes, well, my television set is now 33% cheaper and I can have a much bigger one and all the rest of it, that's great. Yeah, who cares, really? I mean, I got my TV. You don't care about that. On the other hand, somebody tells you about how their town has been hollowed out. They've got a fentanyl addiction. They've got all these crumbling factories and things used to be so much better back in the good old days. Well, maybe not for society as a whole, but for them, Obviously so. And so we've got to have a society that is more ready to help people who are in distress, because it's essential we do this, because if we don't, we risk losing the benefits that come with things like free trade or business turnover. When businesses are destroyed, that doesn't have to mean the end of the road for the people who lose their jobs or the people who lose their business. Indeed, one of the great things about forming a corporation is that it's limited liability for you as an individual. You have a chance to start over. You don't have to lose the shirt on your back, If we can work to increase some of the benefits that we give to people who maybe lose their jobs as a result of trade. If we have some basic income guarantees, some universal health insurance, some of the things that folks in not just European countries, but some of our peer countries in Taiwan take care of, we don't have to worry about the political blowback that understandably results when people feel like they have lost out in a system that may be benefiting people in the aggregate, but for them individually, well, their life maybe is worse. So we got to, instead of telling people, hey, look, you got to be happy where you're at on principle. No, you got to provide for people in some capacity, because if we don't, the lessons of the 20th century seem to be pretty clear that people will look to worse alternatives.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess, well, that's interesting, because Bastiat's position is going to be, listen, guys, I know you guys want to say fuck poor people, rest in piss, you won't be missed, but listen, if we don't help them, they're going to be communists, and that's going to be a lot worse. So I know you hate funding poor people's schools, and I know you guys hate giving money for free paid lunches for children, but bro, we're gonna have to do it. Look at him over there. And then like, oh, he turns around and points to Vaush, like handing out little like Communist Manifesto books to them, and he's like, guys, we gotta stop it. And hey, I mean, you know what? That like drive, that like fear of like socialism is what drove FDR to do the Green New Deal, to do the New Deal, right? That because there was a lot of like socialist movements in the country, and they were like, holy shit, dude, if we don't like get these people out of complete abject poverty, then something's going to be bad. And you know what? Two things happened. For one, we joined a war, and you know what? Wars, especially if you whip the community into feeling like this is a war that we must fight, is really good to get people to go into jobs. Hey, listen, it started to have a lot of companies hire Black people. It had a lot of companies hire women. So something that they didn't want to do because of like a lot of social order, even though it would be profitable, they started to hire those people that helped like the great migration of like Black people up towards the north from the south of the US. That's like, it's all pretty great. The Green New Deal and the war helped pull us out of a lot of that, but war is cringe. So you have to watch out, because these people, a lot of them wouldn't be too against starting another war because it's good for the economy, another war, hell yeah, it's good for the economy. Have everybody pitch in and work again. Let's get at it, Everybody get into a factory. We can start making tanks and just ship them out to God knows where, a part of the country you can't even point to. You don't even know how to pronounce its name. Let's go, boys. So you gotta be careful.
Well, if there's one thing on which I'll unambiguously agree with any neoliberal shill, it's this. I'm no nationalist. I do think that trade and people should flow across borders however they please. And to that end, there is an undeniable good which has been produced from a modern global economy. I will not bemoan the decrease in tech prices over the past 30 years. I kind of rely on it, at least when I was starting up. But sometimes there are root issues that run a little bit deeper than that. It's true that our modern economic system does lead to further wealth accumulation in certain areas. Obviously, more wealth occurs in cities. Some towns get hollowed out, as you said. A lot of these towns get big box stores. And again, everything is cheaper. And all of a sudden, folks that couldn't afford any of this weird stuff before are able to go out of Walmart or Target with what might have been considered luxury goods 20 or 30 years ago. I think that's a lovely thing. But there are problems in the long run from the transportation networks that we've built, not only in our cities, to the areas around them, that's led to the death of walkable American cities. Something we used to have, by the way, back before the invention of the car, when car lobbyists used their corporate power to lobby and bulldoze and repave major American cities to make them inaccessible to human beings, but accessible to metal boxes we drive. To perhaps more pointedly, the death of local small business. The prices at small businesses that you'll go to at any local market. In Seattle, we have Pike Place, where things are maybe a little pricier than what you get at a big box store, but everyone goes there. It's very popular. The reason for that is because no business open there can be a chain. It must be one of its kind. The first Starbucks was opened there. Now that's a chain, of course, but at the time, that was the very first one. People like local, livable communities. They correspond positively with decreases in depression and suicide, to increases in local community involvement, to greater degrees of health. And why am I bringing all this up when we're talking about, broader economic systems? Well, to me, what we're seeing with worker cooperatives in their modern resurgence here in America is a revitalization of the local community and business spirit that used to make some of the parts of this country so great to live in, where cooperatives, which tend to be a little bit smaller, a little more local, are now filling a long unmet desire. And that is to know the person who works there when you go in. What many people now enjoy with bartenders and restaurant patrons used to be a common thing at stores all across the country. Everything has been so systematized, globalized. Employees shuffle in and out. They get dropped and brought in. Worker turnover was so high in a job that I had before I went on YouTube that sometimes they actually wouldn't bother training some employees because they were put on for less than 2 months. Not hired for that length of time. They were expected to leave before then. So it was just a dice roll, I suppose, and they weren't wrong half the time. All of this can be directly all this can be directly brought back to the system of ownership that we live in today, a system which deprioritizes the needs of workers, not just at their expense, but at everyone's, because the common American worker benefits not from private ownership when at their workplace. Do they benefit from it when they're not? Goods have been a little cheaper, maybe due to global trade, and I think that's an appreciable thing. Maybe we can keep some elements of that broader system, the cost-saving measures, while maintaining a direct democratic relationship with the institutions we spend most of our time at. I don't interact with my government day in and day out. I vote once every 4 years, and every once in a while.
Holy shit, Vaush is like, he's taking he's eating up that time. Hey, I mean, he's covering all of his bases. He's doing a really good job. I just think it's fun how he's just like, he's just flexing. He's just standing there flexing, and then Dylan and Bastiat just have to look at him until he's done.
While something drives me to the DMV. When I worked, I spent 8 hours a day there. That's the system I spend most of my time under, and that's the system I had no control over, not directly or indirectly.
Yeah. He do be talking. He does spend that time talking. Yeah, and you're kind of right how a lot of Bastiat's points end with wink wink, nudge nudge. They're kind of stupid. Please stop them. Right. But hey, listen, a lot of people think of it hey, I mean, if it leads them to some good, if it leads them to like some good positions, then, sure. Yeah, the freeze frame is pretty great. Wait a second. I'll grab this for you guys. Maybe you guys can make something out of this. Okay. Here, 1 second. Open. Oh yeah. That's it right there. Here. There you go. There you go, chat. That's for you guys. Have fun, okay? Thank you. No problem. Congrats on making partner. I really appreciate it. I think he has an easier time appealing to libertarians than most right-leaning people. Yeah. A lot of it comes down to that idea, right? As socialism being making good on the promises of liberalism, that like freedom, being able to control like freedom, lifting people out of poverty, giving people the opportunity to make their own destiny, having control over your own life, the agency, all of those things that people like, even lots of freedom as well. A lot of those things that people hold up are something that, that a lot of like libertarian sort of sympathizing people care about, that you can appeal to like this. It's good to appeal to people that I feel like a lot of left-wing people kind of forget about this, but it's good to appeal to people, even if you don't agree with it, in a way that they can understand. I remember I was talking to someone. I feel like I did this. I mention it sometimes, but when I was in a debate with that like global homo kid, I didn't need to give him my own ways to view the world, because I asked him what was important to him, and what he said was important was for people to live like naturally who they are, because that's how he thinks that people were going to be the happiest and the freest. And I was like, okay, if that's like what you want, then you can achieve that through my frame, through what I want for society, right? And then he couldn't get out of that, because after I started explaining to him how you can get there, he kind of like shut down a little bit, because if it makes sense, then it's hard for them to deny with it, because you're appealing directly to what they want to see in society. Why does Dylan have so many rings? He has a ring for every time he gets a ring for every time he debates Rob Noah.
So there are a couple things I'd say about that, because I think Vaush again makes a lot of insightful observations that I broadly agree with in terms of the problems he describes. What I don't agree with are the prescriptions he suggests. So I think the first thing I'd say is that with respect to the idea of the worker, I think it's first of all important to recognize that before we reshuffle society around in a very big way around the interests of the worker, we recognize that here in the United States, the workforce participation rate is about 60%, and it's been falling for years. So before we think about that, I mean, it's also important to recognize what would this mean for all the other people in society, the other 40% of people. And it's my basic contention that a society organized around democratic workplaces would be less efficient as a result of the capital markets problem that I described earlier, and would therefore be less able to fund the decommodification of all these services I mentioned, healthcare, education, things like that. If we don't have the golden goose that puts out the golden eggs, it's real hard to pay for these kinds of programs. And it is my opinion that we don't want to make that shift unless we recognize that, perhaps we might come to the conclusion as a society that there are higher values that are more important than that economic loss that I would argue would occur. But nevertheless, I think we have to reconcile with it and the fact that it would come at the cost of society as a whole. So that's one point I'd say there. I think that the worker's interest is not necessarily served by a democratic workplace or a society of democratic workplaces, because while I would agree that in an individual sense in our existing society, if you want to have a democratic cooperative, you ought to be able to do that, and I can understand there being a lot of benefits. But if we have a society entirely organized around that principle, I think that means some big changes that are very different and very difficult to reconcile with. So that's one point I'd say. The other point I'd say is I think Vaush makes a very good point that society has changed in some very big ways. Like, for example, I wouldn't agree necessarily with all the contours of the General Motors story you told. I would agree with some of it, that lobbyists have certainly had a massive role in transforming America from the kind of, I guess, the sort of small town type of, environment you described to, a society of big highways and cars. Now, a huge part of that is also that I think Americans do, very, very, very much love their cars. I think these are products that have been caught on for, more than just malicious intent. But either way, the destroying of whole communities to build 7-lane superhighways was a decision that went well beyond just market demand. I mean, there was a lot of political choice there. And I think it's also worth noting that a lot of those decisions were made democratically at the expense of vulnerable minorities who really couldn't do much about them. In my community, for example, in Pensacola, a giant freeway was built right through the middle of a black community. And there's a little sign that commemorates this loss. And this loss was the result of a democratically elected government operating in accordance with democratic principles. This is in 1975. It was still imperfect at the time, but even if all the people had had all the voting rights, they would have been outvoted. And unfortunately, I don't know that the result would have been much different if we didn't have the kind of modern appreciation that we have for small communities and for recognizing all the damage that cars do. But I think there's one other point to remember here, that with respect to the loss of small town America in some ways, and not to oversimplify what you were saying, but some of what you mentioned there. One of the biggest problems I think in America is that we have what I might call, for lack of a better term, I don't mean this as an insult, boomer socialism is what the Wall Street Journal calls it. And that's the practice of taking housing, for example, and making it very difficult to build new housing for the sake of preserving the land values at the expense of perhaps the property rights of the people who own existing homeowners, making it very difficult to build dense housing, making it very difficult to build small commercial enterprises, because this whole system has made it very difficult to rent them at affordable prices, and so you end up with big box stores, which are, I would agree, although I do like me a good 3 a.m. trip to Walmart, which I would agree are a little less aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, he's talking about
and come with their own costs, though I, of course, wouldn't argue against their benefits. It's worth noting that housing, healthcare in this country, which we've got the worst of all systems. We don't have a free market system, and we don't have a universal system. We have a half-universal, jury-rigged system that provides universal healthcare of a sort to everybody over 65 and to people who are very poor until you get...
Listen, okay? There's a big reason why there's not a developed nation that has a completely free and open healthcare system, all right? There's a big reason why no developed nation has anything like that. And if you bring that up to some people who live in those countries, they'd like knock you upside the head. Okay, they'd look at you like you're an actual literal demon who crawled out of hell in front of their very eyes. Because at the end of that's incredible to think that listen, we got the worst of both systems. The great system that would be a completely open healthcare. Bro, what would be completely open? Like, imagine you're having a heart attack and then you have to scroll, like you have to like flip through the little like a fucking magazine. You know when Christmas was coming around and you got those like little Christmas gift magazine things, you would have to do that, but like with the ambulance that you're going to call before you like pass out because of your heart attack, and you have to try and find the cheapest one because you can't fucking afford shit. Like, okay, That doesn't sound great to me personally. I don't like that. I don't like that system. I don't think anybody really likes that system personally. But yeah, I mean, but a lot of these problems is because we have conservatives in this country who always want to mean test things, who always want to have some sort of like loophole that says a loophole to give them the opportunity to make poor people's lives worse. Why we have like disability that doesn't allow you to accrue any wealth to like get yourself out of disability. Why we don't have great healthcare, why we don't have like a lot of like social a lot of our social safety nets come with so many like asterisks and conditions that people aren't able to get the full usage out of them, so they keep just falling through it again, and so they keep falling up and down straight through it all the time because of conservatives, because of people who don't care about making society better. They care about punishing people who are the most vulnerable in society.
Get to that point, and in the middle, good luck, So we've got the worst of that, because we've got now, we spend as much as many countries per capita in terms of healthcare coverage, sometimes very much more, and we get very much less for it. We spend very much more for housing, and we get very much less for it. And then we have the same problem with education, though I would argue that's less of a problem, given that even when you go through that whole process, you're still going to have a higher earning potential. But nevertheless, those three areas, housing, healthcare, and education, the costs have driven through the roof because primarily of bad policy. We know that's the case because with other sectors,
Yeah, can you imagine grandma cutting coupons for her like hospital visit, cutting coupons for like her like heart medicine? Oh my gosh, that's the peak dystopia land. Peak dystopia land. What are you doing, grandma? I just finished cutting my coupons for some tomato soup. It's time to cut some coupons to make sure I can get all my pills. Okay.
Consumer goods of all sorts, food, electronics, clothing, prices have gone down, where government policy has been less onerous and less destructive to society as a whole. So it's worth remembering that if we want to live in a free society, we have to reconcile ourselves with the fact that we in the 20th century gave up a lot of freedom. And when we gave it up, we often did it in malicious, race-based ways that now we're having to pay the cost of as a society because they were so poorly implemented in the first place. So when we sacrifice some of our freedom, for example, in the universal healthcare system, we ought to do, or with government payments for healthcare, we got to look at better models here, because the way we do it now is a disaster, right? It costs a lot, it delivers very little. We have the same problem with housing. We've got to make it easier for people to get the services that they want to get, easier for people to have the freedom to build where they choose and build what they choose. And when we're going to have a government program, we've got to look to what other countries have done to design them better, to be more efficient, more effective, so we get better results for everybody in this country.
Okay.
There's a theme in the contention that I see here, and I think perhaps two, one of which I'd like to address first, which is the idea that the democratization of the workplace would conflict with our dreams of progress. Because progress is important, not just in the capitalistic sense of infinite GDP growth or whatever, but as a concept, as a species. I do believe there's always a better society on the horizon. And there is an unfortunate tendency, even among progressives, to sometimes devolve into a sort of myopic worship of the way things used to be. I want to be clear. My dreamy small-town America speech there, it's not about bringing back the way things used to be. Things are better now than they used to be in almost every measurable sense. I would struggle to find significant ways in which they are not. But there are elements of the past that we could have brought into the future that we didn't, either because we chose not to or because the choice was made for us. With regards to the car thing, for example, I don't think that this was some malicious effort on the part of some demographic of American citizens to build out their own wealth. I think that in some ways we traded civil society for dreams of a better and more progressive future. I see this in a lot of ways, where we're unwilling to adhere to certain civilization building principles if it feels like there is an aesthetically more futuristic, but in practice much worse system. What I said earlier about the roads, from the Roman Empire until the 20th century, roads were a place where human beings walked. There were horse-drawn carriages, and even early on with cars, still humans walked. But then we were told to look both ways before crossing the road, an implicit suggestion that it's our responsibility not to get hit. I know what you're thinking, with the cars. Of course, we need to be careful with roads. Cars nowadays, there are many, many times more. But even if you look towards Denmark or the Netherlands, their public transportation systems are light years ahead of ours, which are more socially efficient because it means fewer people have to spend money on cars and car maintenance, which costs the average American about $9,000 a year, a significant portion of a person's paycheck, especially at a median income. It means that there's a gatekeep between accessibility to certain social services, depending on whether you're wealthy or poor. Poor people in cities who don't have cars here in America are shafted beyond belief. They might as well just go ahead and walk out and find some desolate field to lay down in. Some of these cities are unlivable without a car, There are better systems. And the way towards those systems might not be some gigantic revolution. It might be a willingness to invest in them. You talked earlier about the golden goose, the ability to accrue tax revenue for social services. But here in the US, we've got a pretty dismal welfare state. So clearly private ownership isn't doing us any favors in that respect either. I think it's about a social willingness to sacrifice what feels like a little bit of personal freedom for the enhancement of everybody's, not just other people's, yourselves as well. In some infinitesimal way, all of us, when we pay our taxes, do contribute to systems that we benefit from minor regulatory ones that allow us to breathe the air and drink the water, to large sweeping ones like the United States military, which, while I can't say I'm a huge fan of, at the very least, its existence as a concept is something that the state relies on. So whether we're talking about public transportation, which is something which has myriad economic benefits we should be exploring as a nation, or democratic ownership of the means of production, let's look at it incrementally. What steps are we willing to make? If you're concerned about the externalities of these systems, then maybe try to redress banking's investment bias against cooperatives with a few government incentives, state by state even. It doesn't have to be federal. And as we'll see with time, and I believe this very firmly, if you work at a cooperative, you will be happier. There's a reason why self-ownership is such a dream in this country. It's great to be on top, but not everyone can be on top. By definition, we don't live on a single plateau. But we can build a system where everyone can share in the benefits of being on top, have a little bit of control in the places they live, local government, local systems, local democracies, funneling together into something larger. And if we do it well, we do it incrementally, we see it functions, maybe we can take it to the big stage.
Yeah, all of that, pretty good. I want to see if Vaush is going to tackle something Bastiat keeps coming back to. And I'm not sure if he's doing this implicitly. I'm not sure if he's doing this on purpose, but his idea that because he brought up an example of a road just like destroying look at Dylan's face, a road just like completely destroying a small black community because it was democratically voted on. We're not talking, because he keeps bringing up like bad things happen in democracies too, and sure, bad things do happen in democracies. That's factual. I want to see if Vaush is going to bring this up, because even if we grant that, let's say moving from private ownership to public ownership, meaning like let's say like workers' ownership of the means of production. Let's say that if we make that shift in like, let's say on that level, it's a horizontal move. It doesn't make things better. It doesn't make things worse. Let's even grant that it's like a complete horizontal move. If we have the same problems, then even then it would still be a good thing, because we'd still be getting more out of it. People would be happier. More people would share, like he said, the benefits of being on top. More people would have a say in the things that go on in their life. More people will have the ability to have a weigh in on the places where they live. I think a lot of those things are worthy of consideration and are worth the move, even if in like, let's say like an economic sense or a democracy still has problems sense, things aren't necessarily better in that way. There's still things that are worth moving towards there, even if in on that like level it's a horizontal move. I think that's important to realize. I'm not sure if he's gonna go there though.
So I think I appreciate some of what Vaush has said there, and I disagree with other parts of it. For example, I agree that we have, it's actually almost, it's pretty sad actually, the taxes that the average American pays are not as great as you might think. Not so much less than you might think that, say, the Nordics or the Europeans generally pay to get better social services. Like I was trying to say earlier, one of the biggest problems we have in the United States is, especially when you consider federal, state, and local taxes, all of that in the aggregate. You compare that to some of these other countries, they do have a higher percentage of taxes overall, but again, it's not so much higher than you might think given the extra services that they seem to get. And a big problem that we have in the United States is that we have designed a lot of these programs in a patchwork fashion. It's inefficient, it is often means tested, which means that a new bureaucracy has been set up for the purposes of determining that only the right people get the money, and that ends up being a big cost. It ends up being an imposition on people's privacy, all the rest of it. And while society might have a reasonable claim to want to ensure that tax money goes to the right people, the end result is that less money and then more taxes are collected for less benefit for society as a whole. So that's one thing I would say is why I would agree that we don't have the kind of welfare state I would like to have. I think that's mostly not because the unwillingness of Americans to pay for it. I think the problem is that the systems that we have set up are just fundamentally of a patchwork nature. And if we had more universal systems, simpler to understand, something a little more like maybe what Milton Friedman advocated, I wouldn't go so slim as he did, but thinking very seriously about payments in cash instead of payments in or provision of services. Payments in cash, you can go ahead and get what it is you like in a hopefully competitive market. He wanted, I believe, a a negative income tax that would have been, I was thinking about Andrew Yang's basic income, but I'm not a fan of Andrew Yang anymore. The negative income tax, so the idea of being able to have a certain amount of money sort of guaranteed, and it was a high number. I don't think you can do that for everything, but that's one example of how we could provide better services more affordably, more efficiently to people without having to think about how we're going to send taxes through the roof in the process, and give people more meaningful freedom in the process of how they use those benefits. So that's one thing. Another point is I think we have to recognize the problems that we have in society. I don't think American competitive enterprise is generally speaking the problem. Well, I can't speak to the sentiment that Vaush mentioned with respect to employees feeling just generally more satisfied and happier. I didn't really see a lot of that. I can say that I think that's something I could totally understand. But what I'm more, I think that the problem to me with a lot of socialist solutions is that they seem to be about how do we change the means of production, and then those benefits kind of wash across society as a whole. And I don't think the lessons of history really support that kind of analysis. I think the best way to go is to have a capitalist economy that is as efficient and powerful as possible, and then we tax that capitalist economy as necessary to pay for social programs for the purpose of ensuring that we've got a society that people feel like they've got a stake in, that they feel like they can depend upon, so that we avoid the kind of abject hopelessness that a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, may feel in our modern society. So that's one point that I'd make there. Beyond that, I certainly agree with incrementalism. I mean, that's kind of the whole neoliberal way. But I think it's important to recognize, too, the nature of the problems that we have in the United States. I don't think they're really focused so much on business. I think the biggest problems we have in the United States, again, are housing, healthcare, and education. And those are the result of bad policies, not really the failure of, say, the capitalist system, more like the failure of Americans to live up to their own capitalist principles, trying to protect their home values, for example, against their neighbors, with no real moral justifiable claim on doing so, in the process making it more expensive for everybody else in society to live, making it harder for young people to buy homes, all for the purpose of basically protecting the land values of existing people. And folks, if you've never been to a rezoning hearing, oh my God, that is the most racially repulsive experience I've ever had, in the sense of hearing people get up there and say, I don't want those people in my neighborhood in front of the people in their neighborhood. So that's another thing I'd say, is I'm oftentimes very skeptical of the idea that democracy is always the solution, and that more of it is always an unparalleled good. Democracy is an important thing with respect to government, because with government, hey, you don't have a choice, right? It's real damn hard, unfortunately, to leave not only your own town, your own state, but your own country in particular. And so we need democracy for a variety of reasons, but for one important reason, because it's just so hard governments have a lot of power over you, and you are very much stuck with the government you got. When it comes to companies, it's a little easier to move around, and we should make it easier to move around with more of the kind of universal benefits that I mentioned earlier, instead of the problems right now where we tie people to their jobs with healthcare and with making housing very expensive. So there are a lot of things we need to do, but I don't think it's about the productive side of the economy. I think it's more about the distributive side and the regulatory side.
The axe salesman trying to convince the trees that the axes are their friends. I want to see if Vaush is going. I want to see if Vaush is going to tackle this in the way what I imagine what may happen. What I imagine what may happen is he's like, yeah, like democracy, sure, it has like problems, but if we remain in the society that we have right now and the systems that we have right now, the possibility for us to like return to this, for those companies to come back and like swoop up that power again, for people to want to be solely on top, to take as much from the people below them, for people to want to step on people as much as possible, is still something that's going to be there. And a system that doesn't allow for that, it would be better. Like I want to see if he's going to tackle that in that way. Let's see. Listen, companies are people too, dude. You listen. Democracy do bad sometimes. I knew it. That's like a really big thing that I felt like he was gonna bring up. Democracy bad sometimes. Which sure, democracy can be bad. We have like, but we have some things in place that stop like democracy from going like too far, for people who have malintent with their democracy to go too far sometimes. I think that's a good thing. The thing is, like, if your problem is like people not acting morally, I don't know why the solution is companies, okay? Because their only morals is their only moral philosophy that they abide by is how much money they can make.
Before Vaush responds, I'll let the beginning of the response be able to respond to that, but I want to propose this because I want this to be sure to be covered in this debate. Why is it that your model, in comparison to the other, is better when it comes to preservation of certain civil liberties, like freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to protest, and definitely in the age of people having such a intensive debate about tech censorship, for example? I'll let the beginning of the response be about what he just said, but I want to make sure we cover that since we have 60 minutes left.
Of course. I can tackle those both, I think. Tempted as I am to talk about the ways in which I think a cooperative system universally would still be able to pay for the...
Listen, okay? fuck democracy, fuck capitalism. We have to go technocracy. All right. We have to listen. I think that we can reach all of this with radically decentralized UBI that can be brought about with crypto and gaming. All right. I watched Evangelion. All right. I saw Tokyo 3. We need the Magi to control our society. It would do a great thing. Okay. I really think that we can get somewhere with this. Listen, both of these guys are wrong. The real thing is that NFTs are going to be the future. All right. Who needs to buy fruit and produce? When you can buy your Lazy Lion NFT? All right. He's so cool. Stop quoting Grimes for your theory. She was reading theory. I don't know what your problem is. I'm stealing your tonsils. I love my tonsils. I never got my tonsil surgery. Leave me alone. Yeah, listen, I want to live in Tokyo 3, okay? I want to live in Tokyo 3 with Andrew Yang as our shadow leader, who doesn't actually do anything, is the Magi underground that really does all of the hard computing. That's what I want. I'm going to make an NFT? Maybe one day. No, it's not happening. Yeah, Jared, 19.
Necessary welfare costs of a modern society. I think I might be putting the cart before the horse here, because I have a feeling that many of the people in the audience wouldn't agree with me that welfare is something we should be investing in anyway. So I'd like to take a step back, if I may, and address what I think might be the more fundamental problem here, which is, again, liberty. With regards to liberty, the problem that I have with American libertarianism, as it's traditionally expressed, is that liberty is gatekept behind wealth. In this country, you are not free to do what you want unless you have wealth. You are free from many things, certainly. That old adage, what is it? It is equally unlawful for both the wealthy man and the poor man to sleep beneath the bridge. When laws are built in such a way as to discourage behaviors more likely to be engaged in by the working class, these are not laws which are fundamentally encouraging healthy guidelines to what a good society is. What we're really doing is socially determining the corral, the barbed wire, around where it is and is not comfortable to be. Now, most people in this country can't afford a small emergency. So I don't think most people in this country are able to really experience the incredible social and technological benefits of living in the 21st century. Now, I can, and I know a lot of people in this audience can, but I know there are a lot of folks who can't, who nonetheless advocate for certain positions because they believe that the freedom of the wealthy is the freedom of all. And to that, I would say, to me, this is nothing more than a contemporary defense of the aristocracy. Back in feudal Europe, to be a lord or a lady, I suppose, what you really, at the fundamental level, needed to do was have a large army and conquer a given bit of land, and you just asserted your will on the local population in a manner which is not at all corporate in the sense that it was directly and governmentally authoritarian, sure, but it was a freedom, wasn't it? After all, we're not directly talking about violence against common people. We're talking about higher level political conflict, and then as a result of it, an aristocrat has the opportunity now to control the land around them, and if you work there, that's you working for your rent, essentially. That's a type of freedom we decided was harmful to the freedom of others. The freedom of the few aristocrats was not more important than the freedom of the many, many, many serfs. Some people think this is hyperbolic, and to an extent it is, but I think that it's a similar logic. We should be promoting freedoms which are truly universal, absolutely and utterly without any requirements, because that's what freedom is. Freedom can't be conditional, because when freedom becomes conditional, you're only enforcing a class system. A class system in the modern sense, perhaps, may be more defensible than that of the feudal Europe, or in times past, or the old Indian caste system, or whatever the Romans did, if one wanted to look that up. But it is nonetheless a caste system. So let's look to systems that are truly universalized, not just in who gets their money, but also in who has say over what is done with it. And when it comes to democratically run corporations, not only do you accrue the many benefits I spoke of earlier, higher happiness, lower turnover, greater capital investment, higher rate of return because of lower chance of being closed, and those are good benefits, by the way.
No coconut
you also
yet.
get a common understanding. This society that I live in is mine. Every brick, every tile, every window, every roof tile, everything in it is mine and everyone else's.
That's true, comrades. That's why when communism comes, we will all share a toothbrush, because it is our toothbrush, okay? Now, it's not like, it's not a private, like Vaush said, every tile, every window, every brick, it is ours, comrade. Please, I need to use the community toothbrush. I haven't brushed my teeth in 3 days. All right.
I have a direct investment in the well-being of myself and my neighbor, because when you believe that and your neighbor believes that, both of you are better off.
Yeah, we
It's
share
a
our
social
lives.
contract. And while competitiveness is a valuable part, not just of the human spirit, but also of modern economies, it can at times lead us to believe that conditional benefits are the same thing as universal liberation. So I reject that. And I would hope that many people in the audience, who I'm sure would disagree with me on a lot of stuff, would agree that a truly fair libertarian society would be one where the benefits of all are ensured by the incentive structures and systems that we've built, not just a small privileged few, because if you run down that road, I mean, eventually, and you've seen corporate towns, I'm sure historically, eventually you just get back to feudalism. I think everything gets back to feudalism with enough, time and free non-intervention engagement outside of some kind of broader power structure. You create a power vacuum outside of any intervention. So that's my opinion on that.
Yeah, our goth GF. So Vaush touched on a couple of things. Freedom for the wealthy is not freedom for all. Very true, very base. Just because Jeff Bezos is able to do basically anything with his money doesn't mean that I'm able to do the same. Now, when Twitch got leaked and I wasn't in the top 1,000, I wasn't in the top 10,000 of Twitch earners, that proved that I am actually a broke boy. I am broke as fuck. Because I wasn't even Denims. Dylan and Denims were in the top 10K, but I'm not. I'm too poor. All right, I'm too tiny. So listen, if you wanna help me out, listen, you can help your proletarian streamer. Okay, I'm the real socialist streamer here. Okay, because I wasn't in the top 10K. I wasn't in the top 10K. It doesn't be. I'm too goddamn poor. So yeah, like freedom for all, freedom for just the wealthy is not freedom for all. Just if you're basically the argument that he was making is if your freedom is based on how well you can afford that freedom, it's not really freedom at all. It's just it's back to surfland for you, bucko. And basically what he's getting at is more limitations lead to more freedom, or to an extent more. Yeah, our fleshlight. True, so true, Basti. More limitations to a certain degree leads to more freedoms, right? So we believe in freedom of movement. So me and Vaush share that idea that freedom of movement is something that's vitally important to like a global society. I think that's a great thing. People to be able to go where they want, when they want, typically is like an idea we should strive for. That being said, it should still be illegal to drive on the sidewalk, and it should still be illegal to drive through an orphanage. You know what I mean? Like because I think the people who walk on the sidewalk should be able to be afforded the freedom of not being hit by a car, and the people in the orphanage should be able to have the freedom to not be like ran over in their bed by like a Ford F-150. You know what I mean? We believe in freedom of movement, just not that much movement. Stop moving like that. I don't like that. Please. Socialism is when you're in the top, when you're not in the top 10K. Did you guys see that like 25% of the 0.1% of Twitch streamers don't make a minimum wage? That shit's incredible. Because remember, Twitch leaked all of my data. 4chan could have my goddamn bank information right now. And they still take half of my money. So, and streamers are the people who create literally all of the value for Twitch. So it's just an incredible meme how, and I don't think I am either. I can't tell you guys my finances because it's TOS, but yeah, I can't, I'm not sure if I'm making minimum wage just from Twitch, period. So, you know, that's wait, I think I maybe 725 maybe. But yeah, like 25% of the top 0.1% don't make a minimum wage. So, you know, it's not necessarily the best memes here. We're not all what the fuck's his name? Train wrecks? We're not all train wrecks where $250,000 in 3 months is nothing to me. Okay? That's a lot to me. That's a lot of money.
And I'd be happy to address the point you mentioned earlier as well. I have to say I appreciate Vaush's discussion of discussion of the feeling of public property, because I have to say that just does not seem to be the way I think most people think about public property, except in the occasional idealistic type of sense. You know, for everybody in society to own something is for nobody to own it. It's for the state to own it. It's for the people who are legally able to exercise power over that thing to own it. So I reject the idea something that
Yeah, that's why you guys give subs and I'm just fucking sitting here, okay? Because most of you guys probably, like a decent amount of you guys may have more money than me. I mean, it kind of be that way when you're in streamer land, okay? It kind of be that way.
that is socially owned is something you feel like you very much have a stake in. I feel like I have a stake, for example, when I drive past a military base or when I drive past a public school. But at the end of the day, in terms of the authority I have over that property, it is very little to none. And I think it is important to recognize that while democracy is important, the democracy does not automatically really change that reality, right? You still have to go through the laborious process, and it is a worthwhile process, and I would say it is a noble process. But nevertheless, the process of exercising your will, convincing other people to get to your side, and then you can exercise change as you see fit, but certainly never alone, always with others. That's not a bad thing. That's how democracy works. But I don't think I think it's important not to overestimate the very real difference between public property and private property. Private property is a meaningful thing because, when you can acquire it, it means that you have the ability to exercise authority over that property. Not unlimited, of course, but certainly much greater than you would over, say, a form of public property that you have no ownership right in. So that's one point I'd say. Another point I would say is I reject the idea, despite all the problems that I've highlighted here, that our system does not still, perhaps more than ever in some ways, materially benefit most people in this country. The middle class, I saw this recently actually in a chart from a great guy by the name of Scott Lincecum who works at the
You're a Far Eastern Myth. Thank you so much for those $10. You got $10 because Vaush isn't around. So tell him, nah. I'm not sure how I was supposed to read that out. But probably make more sense spoken out loud. Maybe not, because I'm stupid. But I appreciate those $10. Thank you so much.
Cato Institute, where he showed that the middle class has shrunk. And also the lower class has shrunk because there are more people who are wealthy in the United States than there have been really ever before. Now, it's not an appreciably great difference, but there have been increases in wealth in this country in the past, say, 20 years. We've had some serious economic crises, unfortunately, and we're still arguably in the midst of one. But it is worth taking the long view sometimes, too, and recognizing that in this country, we've had not just
how do you describe
great amount
class,
of wealth accumulation, but a great amount of opportunity for a lot of people. And I mean, you can see it in the miracles in our friggin' pockets here, the kind of incredible technology that provides.
So true, bestie. Socialism is when no iPhone.
Provides all kinds of wonderful new jobs and opportunities. It's important not to lose sight of that stuff, folks, because when you do, you look at some of the societies that have given that kind of thing up in the past, and I think it's easy to forget just kind of how much we have in this country and maybe take it for granted. But it is also very important, and this would also, I think, go out to a lot of libertarians here, not to say, well, you see, you have the opportunity to make it just as well as I did, and therefore, I'll just kind of sit there and stew in a principled starvation if you're not doing so well. No. You cannot argue people into suffering based on principles alone. And I really do believe that. You've got to give people some material basis for hope in a better future, some material basis for a sense of security, and a feeling that if I try for a better life, I try something different, I'm not going to necessarily end up completely destitute and hopeless. It is important to account for that, because when that happens, and when it is not.
Wait, what? Oh my gosh, what happened? Oh no, the stream goddamn broke. Shoop. There we go. Thank you for letting me know. Overlay got broke or renode. Here, 1 second. It happens that way sometimes. Overlay is fucked. Yeah, the overlay got fucking bodied. There we go. We're back. Thank you, everyone. Beat at Venezuela. I was busy typing, so I didn't see. You broke the movie, Shark? I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Okay.
Account for it becomes a core feeling that if I try for a better life, I try.
Here, 1 second.
People into suffering based on principles alone, and I really do believe that. You've got to give people some material basis for hope in a better future, some material basis for a sense of security, and a feeling that if I try for a better life, I try something different, I'm not going to necessarily end up completely destitute and hopeless. It is important to account for that, because when that happens, and when it is not accounted for, it becomes a core of populist movements that we are seeing more vicious than ever in this country. And those kinds of movements are based often on false narratives, but there is always a core of genuine suffering in those narratives. And I think it is important that we recognize that the state has an important role to play to relieve what Milton Friedman called, justly, acute distress and misery. The state's got to alleviate that so that the rest of the competitive order that delivers all these benefits I've been talking about at length here has the room to work, and people feel like they've got a chance, got a stake in it, feel that the whole business of private property is something that they can be a part of too. Because if it's not, well, then you're in real trouble. So I think in that sense, I believe that capitalism preserves, or rather, liberal capitalism, liberal democracy, all of these things preserve not just the individual freedom that I talk about by respecting private property, respecting individual rights, but because they promote effective welfare states that I've talked about, for example, in Europe, those states add to people's positive liberties, and I would argue reinforce the security of some of those negative liberties. Because while we give something up when we pay our taxes, when we pay for the aircraft carriers that I hope, as we speak, are making plans to defend our allies in Taiwan, or who should be our allies at least, we nevertheless recognize that's an imposition on our freedom, right? But it is an important imposition to make in defense of a free world writ large.
Yep. Okay. So
I saw a bunch of people like Bastiat posting. It's so weird. Because I'm personally pro Taiwan, but I saw them posting a map of Taiwan and China, and it was like Taiwan was labeled Taiwan, and then China was labeled West Taiwan, and I was like, what the fuck is happening? Are you guys okay? So I'm not sure what the neolibs are up to on Twitter. I try and like do a wellness check on them every now and again, but it was definitely a curious meme that was happening. Definitely a curious meme indeed. So it's so okay. So a couple things I want to touch on from Bastiat. How do you describe the middle? My question would be like, how do you describe the middle class? How do they describe the middle class? Has like the middle, like that definition of middle class changed? Because we have been able to get access to some more products. That's right. Some products have gotten cheaper, and that's cool. But also, how do you balance that with a lot of like the job loss that happened, with a lot of the communities being hollowed out? You can't. It's hard to argue a system for people to like when it kind of upends their life and then replaces all of the things that would make life worth living with. You can go into Bed Bath and Beyond and get like a cheap popcorn maker. Oh, I mean, my community has been completely destroyed, but I have this popcorn maker and I have a slap chop, it's just, and they're all really cheap, and I got a coupon and it was like $5. It's like cool, but there's still a lot of problems there. And one thing that he keeps bringing up, which is super interesting, it seems like Bastiat is doing this. He's taking this and giving time to try to coach libertarians and poke them into the, hey buddy, I know that your economic system is basically built off the principle of rest and piss, you won't be missed. The people who make the most amount of money are going to be the top of society. But it's a really hard sell for people at the bottom to just believe that. So, hey, sweetie, you do have to make sure that you take care of people's you do have to make sure that you take care of like human beings and have some humanity in your politics, or else they're going to do something crazy like turn to Vaush and they're going to like think that socialism is okay. So, and I just think it's kind of like a tell for me how he was just straight up like, you can't argue people into suffering on principles alone, which basically means that, which I think personally that libertarianism, the advocacy for libertarianism is trying to argue people into abject suffering. So, thank you, Bastiat, for putting it in ways that would sound like just posturing out of my mouth, but at least it works out.
We have 3 minutes left, so you're both going to have 1 minute outros, and afterwards shout ourselves out. We'll wrap it up. Thank you both for being extremely civil, and I had to do nothing today, so I appreciate it.
Happy to make you irrelevant. There's a concept in philosophy called the veil of ignorance, where you measure, among other things, the worth of a society based on your average prospects if you were to enter as a member without knowing who you would become. It must be remembered that to the average American, while
holy crap, that man was so
without knowing who you would become.
Look how dark this man is. Holy shit. Holy fuck, dude. It's like in the movies where those like fucking movie scenes, or like those those scenes where they get like an informant on the inside and they're like scared to show their identity, but their face is just completely black. Yo, dude, look at this.
Remember,
because he turns and you can see like his lanyard, but he's still 100% black. Yeah, we haven't unlocked this character yet. This is an unlocked fighter. We haven't. It's DLC. Oh yeah, you're right. It is the Libertarian Convention. Yeah, you have to pay for that. That's a microtransaction. You have to get him in a loot crate. We haven't got him yet. He's not unlocked. Okay, my bad. Sorry, it's all starting to make sense now. Okay, thank you.
That to the average American, while private property
DLC
ownership is
debater.
a delightful thing, to many of them, to most of them,
Name that
this is not
libertarian.
theirs. It's somebody else's. Their house, they rent. Their business, not theirs. That's controlled by somebody else. That lawn, that street, that city. Owning things is great when you're the one who owns them.
Wait, did you say least dark Joe Biden voter? POV, you meet the least black Joe Biden voter. Perfect. I love it.
Full thing. To many of them, to most of them, this is not theirs.
Bucko.
It's somebody else's. Their house, they rent. Their business, not theirs. That's controlled by somebody else. That lawn, that street, that city. Owning things is great when you're the one who owns them. But to the common welfare, the vast majority of people, just by mathematical certainty, do not. All the world belonged to everyone before we divvied it up and set property lines in place. And that might be a dreamy hippie notion, but in a way, when free land is taken
20
and
seconds.
the government takes it and they divvy it up and give it off to corporate interests, something fundamentally there is lost, a common will, an inheritance. And I think that we can take it back. Whether you believe in revolution, reform, welfare or not, we should all here believe in freedom. And however we achieve that, we should be deliberate and universal in how we do so.
Bastiat?
Wait a second. Vaush unironically came here with fucking coconut water? Oh my gosh. He unironically came to the libertarian debate with coconut water. Oh wait, they both have coconut water. What the fuck? They might as well be giving out Soylent. What the fuck is happening? Yo, what the fuck? This is some Valley Girls shit. What the hell? This is like a dude. Do women like above 18? I thought that was the only type of people who drink, women who are below 18. I was the only people who drink this shit. What the fuck? It's a fucking Vita coconut water. Damn. They're probably coordinated. Maybe. Oh, I see. Vaush wanted to bring. Oh, I get it. Vaush bought this. In the airport. Okay, when he was about to fly out of Washington, and he dumped it out and then refilled it with Soylent. Because all of us lefties run off of 100% soy. We're soy-driven biomachines of terror and destruction for the right. And so he bought two, and he gave one to Bastiat just so people wouldn't get suspicious that he was he just had just coconut water. Yeah, it's a mental terror. Every time he takes a sip of his coconut water, he sees the embers restored on his personal HUD. I see it. Hey, listen, coconut water for Coconut Island. Yeah, he got it. He brought it because he woke up with it first. Oh, very unfortunate, my friend. It seems that I have woken up before you. Would you like some coconut water? It's for a price.
I would thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Vaush. I really enjoyed this. I would only say one that I would reject the idea that Vaush posited of saying that most people do not. I mean, homeownership rates, for example, in the United States, I think show otherwise. Private property is something that's widespread and enjoyed on a wide basis in this country. One of the problems that we have, though, is that, for example, in place of a social welfare system, we have a system of easy access to credit, which is how a lot of Americans meet basic needs, but of course, which has some disadvantages, you might argue, I think very reasonably over greater access to some of the programs I described, healthcare, a Friedman-esque basic income, things like that. So I would say this. I believe that liberal capitalism, particularly the American variety, has done more to drive the progress and advancement of humankind in the last 250 years than any other world historic force in history yet devised, and perhaps, who knows what the future may bring. But
20 seconds.
I think it's very much worth defending and protecting. And I would hope that for those of you who agree with me on the basics of that you would also agree with me that it's important we recognize that there are other important elements that must be protected, a strong military that can help us and our democratic allies defend one another against rising authoritarians, in the People's Republic of China in particular, and also a social welfare state that can help Americans feel like, hey, you know what? Look, capitalism is great, but I also don't have to feel like I'm going to be flat on my back if I don't win out from it. It's important to remember that. So thanks.
How many times did he quote Milton Friedman? Did he quote Milton Friedman like 5 times? Oh, geez. It's a capitalist nation. I'm sorry. I'm still enamored by how they brought coconut water. Wait a second. This is like winding down. Here, let's finish this out. But do they always have the coconut water? Oh my gosh, it's only for them. Wait, only they get the coconut water.
Thank you so much.
All right. It's over. Beautiful.
We
Wait,
were
no.
told. That's what we were told.
See, they were the only ones who get the coconut water. Vaush did wake up first on the island. Holy shit. They don't have coconut. They don't have coconut water. Oh my gosh. They did. I can't believe I just noticed it, but okay. All right, well, and there's your debate, everyone. There's your debate, ladies and gentlemen. What do you all think? Yeah, they both woke up before Dylan. If you guys didn't know, the entry fee to the free Future Fest, the entry fee wasn't $50. It was actually a blowjob at the door, okay? Because they woke up before you, okay? It's not coercion.